Welcome everyone. I'm Luca Motola. I was PC co-chair for MobiSys this year. It is my pleasure to be chairing the keynote of Professor Laurie Cranor, who is the director and Bosch Distinguished Professor of the Scilab Security and Privacy Institute, and for Systems Professor of Computer Science and Engineering and Public Policy at CMU. There are plenty of things to like of Professor Cranor. I'm really looking forward to the talk. I can only mention that, for example, in 2016, she was chief technologist at the US Federal Trade Commission. She co-founded Wombat Security Technology, and she's also fellow of the ACM IEEE, AAAS, and a member of the ACM Chi Academy. She also has a family band, I learned, where she plays the flute. And she's also founder of Dynamoms, that is an educational soccer program for women over 30 with little or no experience playing soccer. And as a dad of a very young daughter, I perhaps might be interested in that at some point. Okay, so feel free. I'm really looking forward to the talk, and I'll hand it over to Professor Cranor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here today and to talk with you about one of my favorite topics other than playing soccer, and that is designing usable and useful privacy interfaces. So I've been doing privacy research for quite some time. And I'm going to take you back to a paper that I published with my student, Alicia McDonald, back in 2008. Alicia is now actually a faculty member at CMU. We were looking at privacy policies, and it was well known that nobody actually read them. But Alicia wondered, what would happen if people actually read them? How much time would it take people to read all the privacy policies for all the websites that they actually visit? And so we gathered data about how many different websites people visit and what the average adult reading speed is and how many words are in privacy policies. And we came up with this completely ridiculous number of 244 hours per year. That's a lot of time, and it's probably more time than I even spend reading privacy policies, and that's kind of what I do. So this just kind of illustrates that if we expect people to protect their privacy by reading privacy policies, that's not really going to work. If you've ever actually looked at a privacy policy on a website, it looks something like this. That's just really unworkable. So Alicia and I said this back in 2008. There were others who went on to say similar things. This comes from a White House report that described the situation as a fantasy world that people would actually read these notices. So it's pretty clear that the idea of people reading privacy policies is unworkable on the web. Okay, what about on devices? There, I argue, the problem is even worse. If we can't get people to read privacy policies on websites, on a computer screen sitting in front of them, they're not going to go look for a privacy policy on a drone that's flying by, or on a light bulb on the ceiling, or on a device that doesn't even have a screen to present the privacy policy to you. So this poses some problems. And so we've been looking in our research as to how we can actually put people in control over their personal information under these sorts of conditions. So today I'm going to start by talking about traditional privacy policies and how we can move beyond them. Then some of the research that we've done on privacy and security and transparency for IoT devices. And then some work on privacy choices for websites and a privacy icon we developed for the state of California, and some final thoughts. Okay, so traditional privacy policies, you go to a website, you read, you scroll, you read, you scroll, lots of long text. But that's not the only option. So we put together what we call a design space to say, all right, well, what are the different ways that we can convey privacy information to people? One idea is that when you are setting up a device or visiting a website for the first time, something may pop up for you that you can look at. It may be just in time. At the time when data is actually about to be collected, you may be informed about that particular data that's being collected. It may be context dependent, depending on what activities you are doing on a website or with a device. It may be periodic, once a month, you may get privacy information. It may be persistent, like that little location icon that you often see on a mobile device screen to indicate when location is being collected. Or it may be on demand. You may never see it unless you actually go look for the privacy information, and then there's some link or button you can click on. We can convey privacy information in the primary channel, that is on the device for which it pertains. But when you're dealing with a device that may not have a screen or has a small screen, maybe we use a secondary channel. So if I'm going to use my mobile phone to configure a device, then I could also use my mobile phone to read the privacy policy for the device. Sometimes the channel is public because what we're talking about is a public device, a camera mounted on the wall, and there may be a sign that's actually mounted on the wall as well with privacy information. Normally we think about privacy information being visual. We read something, we look at symbols, but sometimes it's auditory. So sometimes you call a company and there's like a recorded message. This phone call is being recorded, right? That is an auditory privacy message. It also can be haptic. You might get vibrations on your device to indicate some sort of data collection. And of course, my favorite is machine readable, where we can convey all the information in a bunch of XML or something, and then my device can consume that information and do something useful with it. And then there are issues as to whether I actually have to read this, whether I'm blocked from doing something until I've gone through some privacy notice or not. Okay, so we've looked at different ways of implementing privacy notices besides the long text. So there are a variety of things out there. We've seen games. It makes sense. A gaming company might convey their privacy information in a game. This particular one I didn't find particularly useful, but nice idea. We've seen lots of videos where companies supplement all their long text with short videos about different aspects of privacy. And we've seen lots of icons, some of which are better than others. Here's some more examples of privacy icons. One of the problems with these icons is that there are a lot of privacy concepts. And so you end up with a lot of icons, and without the words next to them, they can often be pretty difficult to figure out. And there's just so many different facets of privacy. So trying to have like a complete set of icons for all aspects of privacy may not work all that well unless you're planning on using the icons to supplement the written words. We've also looked at the idea of having kind of something like a nutrition label, this sort of standardized text in some sort of tabular format. This is something that we mocked up for websites. And we did some testing, and it works pretty well. People are able to kind of at a glance get an idea of how much data is being collected on the website, how much is being used, and then the idea is that you could drill down to get more information about the things you're interested in. This particular example is actually generated automatically from machine readable XML P3P privacy policies. That's a web standard that's now obsolete, but back in 2003, that standard came out, and this illustrates kind of one of the reasons why it's useful to have all of this in machine readable form, because then you can take that XML and you can turn it into something that is going to be useful for people, and different devices, different applications can consume that information in different ways. In the United States, our financial privacy notices look something like this. These are two different banks, and yet their notices look very similar. They use different colors, they may use different fonts, but they have basically the same information in the same order, and they have this standard table at the bottom of the page. So this was something that a set of US government agencies put together through a long iterative process with public comments. The end result is sadly not perfect, but it is a lot better than what we see in a lot of other areas because of the fact that it's standardized, and we can very easily compare banks by putting these policies next to each other and just looking across the table. And sadly, this is not machine readable. This is generally posted in PDF format. But my students decided to go and collect these and parse the PDF and put it all in a database. So we did that, and we put over 6,000 US banks into a database, basically from screen scraping these policies. Because they were PDFs and there was no standard generator tool. Everybody kind of hand coded these things. There are typos in them. There are things that are in the wrong order. And so we had to, our parser had to account for all of that. So not perfect, but you get a pretty good idea. And so now, we can build a bank search engine. You can search for banks in your zip code, and you can compare their privacy practices side by side and find the ones that are going to best meet your needs. So this is an example of what you can do with these machine readable privacy policies. Another thing we've looked at is, one of the reasons you might be interested in a privacy policy is because you want to know what you can opt out of. Be able to say, hey, don't collect this information from me, or don't use it in particular ways. And if you try to find the opt-outs on websites, they're all over the place. They're often hard to find. So we built a tool that is basically using natural language processing and machine learning to parse websites and find the opt-outs. And then you can use this browser plugin to get a list of all of the opt-outs on the website and to go there. Now, sadly, it can't actually opt you out of all those things. You have to go there and do it manually because, again, this is not a machine readable system, but we were able to at least find them and put them in one place for you. Okay, so there are lots of different types of privacy interfaces that are interesting to look at. I've been talking mostly about privacy notices and icons, but we also have consent interfaces. And so these are the interfaces where you're actually given some sort of a choice and asked to consent or not to some type of data collection. There are privacy settings interfaces. May give you a lot of different privacy choices. And there are privacy dashboards that may put lots of privacy choices in one place and also give you some indication as to what data is being collected, what you've already agreed to, things like that. So we're interested in making all of these interfaces as useful and usable as possible. And one of the key things we need to do in order to do that is to actually do user studies and find out whether they actually are useful and usable for real users. So we need to do an evaluation. What are the criteria we should look at? So let's start with a privacy notice. Well, the first thing is the notice is no good if you don't even notice it. So we need to first find out whether people have even, noticed the fact that the notice is there, have seen it. And then if they've seen it, do they actually stop and read it? because there are lots of notices that we see out of the corner of our eye and we're like, yeah, whatever. And we don't actually take the time to focus on them and find out what they say. For people who do actually read it, do they understand what they're reading? Or is this just all a bunch of very confusing text or icons? If they understand it, do they actually find it useful? Does it answer the questions that they have? Does it help with their decision making? And then finally, does it impact their decisions or their behavior? So if they're trying to decide whether to use a device or a website, whether to provide information, does this give them the information they need to make that decision, so that they can say, yes, everything's good, I'm happy with the privacy here, I'm going to proceed, or no, I'm not happy with this, I'm going to back out, I'm going to go find some other device or website. Right. So when I was at the Federal Trade Commission in 2016, one of the projects that I worked on was looking at what we called putting disclosures to the test. So I was very interested in evaluating privacy disclosures. The FTC actually has lots of other types of disclosures they're interested in, organic products and light bulb energy efficiency and things like that. So we looked at all of these things together. We invited in experts in all of these areas. And it was interesting to see that they were all basically doing the same thing. They all had very similar advice. It didn't really matter whether we were evaluating privacy notices or medicine bottles. There were some common things that they said. A big one was, it's really important to test. Even if you have a low budget, you really should do some testing of usability of your disclosures. And it's also really important that when you're testing comprehension, you do it in context. So it's not enough to just hand people a statement and say, does this make sense? But what you really need to do is give them a scenario and say, okay, now you see this statement, can you make a decision based on it? And you present them with a choice and see, what choice would you make having now looked at this disclosure. All right, so now let me tell you about some evaluation projects that we've done in my lab. This is one of the older ones here, the study that we actually started, I think, back in 2007 or 2008. We went through a number of iterations before we got to this particular version that got published in a journal in 2011. So we had built a search engine that had privacy meters in it. And so each search result was annotated with a privacy meter. And what we wanted to know is, does this actually make any difference on where people click, which websites they decide to visit? And so we did a lab study with Pittsburgh residents, and we brought them into the lab and we asked them to purchase 2 items with a new shopping search engine. Right? We had multiple versions of the search engine so that we could test our hypotheses about about people using this privacy meter. We gave people money that they could use for shopping. And we told them that if they didn't spend it all, they could keep the change. So they had an incentive to shop from the more inexpensive websites. Right. So here is what the search engine looked like. One of the things that we had people buy was AA batteries. And here you can see, they can see the price of the item, including shipping, and they can see the privacy meter on the left. And if they click on the privacy meter, they could actually get a report with more information about the privacy of that website. We set this up so that the first 4 search results were canned, and they always came up the same. And then the rest were whatever else came up. We specifically selected merchants that people were less likely to have heard of, and that had privacy policies arranged in a particular way. So we had in addition to the privacy report condition, we had another condition that was exactly the same, except it said handicapped accessibility instead of privacy. And that was something that we pre-tested. People said that they cared about privacy, they didn't really care about handicapped accessibility on websites, and so we wanted to see whether we would get the same effect. Our hypothesis was we wouldn't, because people said that handicapped accessibility they didn't care about. And then we had a condition that had no meter, which again we would expect would be different from the privacy meter condition. Okay, we set it up so that the first item had the worst privacy and the fourth one had the best privacy, and the first item had the lowest price and the fourth item had the highest price. Right. So our hypothesis was that with no information or the handicapped accessibility, people would purchase the first item because it's the top of the list and it is the lowest price. And with privacy information, we hypothesized they would purchase the fourth item because it had the best privacy. And it costs a little bit more, but we thought, well, a lot of people will probably be willing to pay a little bit more. And in fact, that's what we found. Of course, not everybody was willing to pay a little bit more, but quite a few people were. So we did this with batteries. We also did it with a privacy sensitive item. And in this case, it was a sex toy. And we expected to see a larger effect for the privacy sensitive item. More people saying, yeah, I'll pay a little bit more for privacy. And that is in fact what we found. We did get that larger effect for privacy sensitive purchases. All right, so another study we did, we said, what if we put a privacy nutrition label, we'll call it privacy facts, in the Android app store, so that every time you look at an app that you're thinking about downloading, you have this privacy facts interface right there. I see you have a question. Go back. Okay. In the privacy setup with 4 battery sites, was this the actual price, i.e. the websites with worse privacy were cheaper? Yeah, so we actually used real websites with their real prices, and we carefully selected websites that would fit what we needed. So we actually spent a lot of time and looked at a lot of websites till we found ones that had the level of privacy we needed and the price we needed in order to put in the study. Okay. All right, so back to Android privacy facts. So we made a mock-up of an app store, and we populated it with a bunch of apps, and we inserted these privacy facts into them. And then we had an identical mocked up app store that looked exactly the same, except we didn't have the privacy facts. And then we brought people into our lab and we gave them a scenario that they were helping a friend select apps. And we gave them a few different categories, word games, dieting app, travel app, and we asked them to select an app for their friends. And basically what we found is that the people who did not see privacy facts did not consider privacy at all in selecting the apps. But the people who saw privacy facts often considered it, and they would often take the app that had better privacy, but not always. So we did see that if we showed them 2 apps and one was a really popular app that people had heard of, and another one was an app that no one had heard of, sometimes they would just say, I'm going to take this popular app. I played it. I know it's fun. I don't really care what the privacy is. Likewise, if we have 2 apps and one of them has like a really high rating and the other one doesn't, then they might go with the high rating, even if its privacy wasn't as good. But when we had 2 apps that were otherwise fairly similar, then people would often choose based on privacy. Right. So that was a study we did like 10 years ago, and basically demonstrated that privacy nutrition labels in app stores could be useful and could actually influence people's decisions. And then, people said, that's nice. And we published this research paper and then nothing happened. Finally, almost 10 years later, in last fall, Apple announced that they were going to have app nutrition labels in their privacy nutrition labels in their app store. So that was pretty exciting, and they have been rolled out. They're not perfect. There's been a lot of criticism of some of the details, and we're actually doing some research to try to understand what's working, what's not working, how they could be made better. But I think it's really a step in the right direction that we have these labels, and hopefully Apple will improve them as they get feedback. And I understand that Google is going to be rolling out labels as well in their app store. All right, so one of the things that we've learned is that we can do more with automation when we are providing these privacy notices. So we've seen that if we can gather this privacy information with the ability to make it searchable, we can put it in a format that's going to be most useful for users. And so we'd really like to see more standardization and machine readable privacy information because as we have data collection proliferating, not just through websites, but through lots of devices, we're going to have more and more devices around us. This is not really scalable unless we can have user agents that can help users make their privacy decisions, present the information to them in a useful way, and not constantly bombard them with privacy information. All right, so let's look further at the situation for IoT. As I mentioned, one of the problems in IoT is that these devices tend to have pretty small screens or no screens at all. And so we can't convey privacy information directly on them. And so, one idea is, well, they tend to have lights and things that generate sound. So when devices are collecting information, they should blink, or they should vibrate, or they should beep. And that's probably a good idea. But I don't think we can rely on that as the only way of getting privacy information. And we may soon find that we have so many devices that we have this whole cacophony of blinking, beeping, vibrating things around us. And that's not really going to be all that useful either. So we thought, well, what if these devices could also transmit some privacy information in a machine readable way to my personal agent device? So that might be my phone or my smartwatch or some device I always have with me. And so it's listening for information about all of the data collection in my environment. And it analyzes it, and it acts as my personal privacy assistant. It does not beep constantly to tell me that data is being collected constantly. Instead, it beeps or vibrates or alerts me selectively at times when it thinks that I actually need to know. So for example, I might tell it, hey, I don't really care about thermostats and light bulbs that are just noting presence in a room, but not me in particular. But if there is a video camera or there is an audio sensor that is going to record my voice, then I want to know. But if I was in this room yesterday and you told me about it yesterday, then you don't need to tell me about it again. Right. So those are the sorts of things that we can do if we have all these devices transmitting the information and we have a smart user agent that is able to process it and do something intelligent with it. And we're doing research to figure out, well, what is it that people want to know? What would be the intelligent thing that would actually be helpful to people, but not overwhelming and annoying? And we have a system where we have an app which actually can consume all of this information. And we have a registry where you can register IoT devices. And we've done a initial deployment of this both at Carnegie Mellon and then around the world. So this is what the app looks like. I guess this is kind of an old version of the app, but it looks something like this. So I can look at the app on my phone and find out what IoT devices are around me. And I might say, I'm interested in those that are collecting visual data. Let me see what's going on. And then I can see all the apps around me. So this, if I'm walking down the hall at CMU, I would see, oh, here are a bunch of things set up in the hallway in computer science at CMU that are research projects that are collecting visual data. And then I can drill down and find out, who's behind this, and what data are they collecting? How long are they going to keep it? What are they going to do with it? So that's kind of that's useful information, so that I know whether this is something that I'm okay with. If I'm not okay with it, in some cases, there's nothing I can do except not walk down that hallway, go a different way. But in other cases, I may be able to actually opt out and say, hey, I don't want you to collect my information. And then we have this portal at iotprivacy.io, where you can register IoT devices, and you can find IoT devices that other people have registered, or that we have found through basically scraping databases of public video cameras and things like that. Okay, so another problem that we have is with our own IoT devices. We keep hearing that they have security and privacy problems. And so if I'm going to Home Depot or Best Buy, or going online on a website to buy a new IoT device, I'm a little bit apprehensive, and I'd really like to find a device that doesn't have all of these kinds of problems. So I might start looking for security and privacy information when I search for a device. And you can see there's a lot of detailed information about devices, in this case on Amazon. You can find about their size and their weight and what's in the box, but there's actually nothing about security or privacy. And if I go to a brick and mortar store and I actually look at the box, I looked at all sides of the box, and there is nothing about security and privacy. And if I go to a different online store, I have the same issue. Really, the only place that we've been able to find information about security and privacy is some of the manufacturers, in this case, Google, deep in their website somewhere, they have some information. Google actually has a lot of information on their website, but it's very difficult, I think, while you're standing there in the store looking at the device, to be able to get this privacy and security information. So we wondered, well, what if we could put a nutrition label on the packaging for these IoT devices that would give people privacy and security information? Would this be useful? So we did an interview study where we talked to consumers who had purchased IoT devices, and we showed them mock-ups of a privacy and security facts for IoT devices. And we asked them about, do you find this useful? What else would you like to see on it? And overall, people thought it was extremely useful. They wanted it. Many of them said that when they purchased their devices, they hadn't really thought a lot about privacy and security, or if they had, they couldn't find any information. And then as they were using their devices, they would see it transmitting data and wondering, where is it going? Or they would hear a news article about it, about privacy and security issues in IoT devices, and then they really wanted more information. But most people told us that they didn't really know what it is, what questions they should be asking. They're not privacy and security experts, so they didn't know what they didn't know. So then we did another study where we talked to experts and we asked them what should be on the label. And then we did more label mock-ups and did studies with consumers to see whether they understood that information. So one of the big things that we found out from experts is that there's actually a lot that you might want to know about privacy and security of devices. Or at least there's a lot that experts wanted to know. So we came up with a list of 47 different pieces of information, which is what you see on the right. There's a lot of information there. And then we made a version that you see on the left, which is the summary. And that's the consumer-facing version. And so what we imagine is that the version on the left, the overview, is what would actually appear on the packaging or what you would see on a website. And then you can scan the QR code or click on the link if you want all the detailed information. And if you're just happy with what's on the primary layer, that's sufficient. And this has kind of the most important and consumer useful information about privacy and security of IoT devices. All right, let's look a little bit at websites now. So we did a study to see what kind of opt-outs and choices related to privacy you could find on websites. And we studied 150 websites, and we systematically went through and we looked at the homepage, we created a user account, we read those privacy policies, we went to the account settings, and we had lots of data now on how many clicks it takes to find opt-outs, what you can opt out of, what words are next to them, and things like that. We made sure that the 150 sites that we looked at included some very popular sites as well as some less popular sites. So the first thing that we see is that most sites actually do give you privacy choices. We found there are a lot of sites that if they have email communications, then they're pretty likely to let you opt out. If they have targeted advertising, they're pretty likely to let you opt out. And if they collect data, they're pretty likely to have some sort of data deletion available. But the information about opting out was actually really hard to read. So we see that overall, if you score the readability of a privacy policy, it's basically a 10th grade reading level. But if you look specifically about these opt-outs, here it requires a university level reading level. So it's not too surprising because in the opt-outs, we're talking about choices, we're talking about more complicated concepts, but this is significantly harder to read and understand these sections of privacy policies. We also thought, well, there's a lot of text in privacy policies. So in order to find out how I opt out, it would be nice if I could come up with some keyword and I could just search for that and not have to read the whole thing. So what would that keyword be? So we looked at all of the headings in privacy policies related to opting out, and we looked for n-grams that seemed to be common. And in our 150 policies, there was no single n-gram that occurred in more than 20 of the policies. So it was very difficult to find consistent wording. And you can see here some examples of different companies that have very different wording to signal the part of their policy where you can find out about your privacy choices. Another problem is that some websites have a lot of choices. So this is on Amazon, and they have lots of newsletters and marketing information that you can choose to receive or opt out of. And if you encounter this page and you see all the boxes checked, you might spend a lot of time going through and unchecking all of these boxes if you don't want marketing information. And then when you get to the bottom, that's when you see the checkbox that lets you click once and uncheck them all. So that's not a great user interface design. We also saw that a lot of websites have multiple opt-out links that all seem to be kind of for the same thing. And it's not clear whether, in fact, you have to find them all and opt out of all of them or some of them or what the difference is. So if you look on Twitter, if you look in the account settings page, there is a Twitter implemented opt-out. And if you look at their About Ads page, there are 4 different opt-outs, 1 implemented by Twitter and 3 by other parties. And then if you look at their advertisers and other ad partners page, which is part of their privacy policy, there's a Twitter implemented and then an industry implemented opt-out. So this was very confusing. All right, so all of what I just showed you was based on our trained research assistants who know how to read privacy policies, collecting information about what they found. Then we followed up with a lab study where we brought in random people off the street, and we asked them to try to opt out. And we looked at how long did it actually take them versus the shortest path that our trained research assistants found. And you can see the shortest path in orange and the participant average in blue. And you can see that participants actually had way more trouble than our trained research assistants. So, the reality of finding this opt-out information is actually really bad. So we talked about icons a little bit before, and people have said, yeah, this is really confusing. If we just had icons, it would solve it all. People would be able to just look for the icon and opt out. And as I also mentioned, the problem is these icons are pretty confusing. Look at these icons. Do you have any idea what they actually mean? Until we add the words next to them, they're pretty confusing. Here are some more icons that are part of an app, and most of them, I see that there's the throwing up the hands in the middle. That's kind of how I feel when I look at it. Like, I have no idea what this means. I believe in this case it has something to do with children. It's supposed to be a child. So we've looked at some of these privacy icons, and perhaps the most famous privacy icon is this ad choices icon with this blue triangle thingy. The ad industry put forward this icon as a way of indicating when they were doing behavioral advertising. And they said, hey, we're being very transparent and we're showing everybody when there's behavioral advertising, and they can find out how to opt out by clicking on this. But our experience in our user studies was that people had no idea what this meant and they were afraid to click on it. So we decided to do a big online study with 1,500 participants. And in our study, we showed them ads that had this icon and asked them questions about it. So one of the questions was, what would happen if you clicked on the icon? And there were a variety of choices, and people could agree to more than one of them. So more than half the people had the wrong answer. They thought that more ads would pop up, so they weren't going to click on it. And almost half the people said it was a place you could go to a page if you wanted to buy ads. That's also wrong. Only 27% of the people had the correct answer, which is it will take you to a page where you can opt out of tailored ads. And that's pretty bad. So we tried changing, instead of putting the word ad choices next to the icon, we put configure ad preferences next to it. And we saw a huge improvement. In fact, we got up to 50% of the people saying the correct interpretation. So, from this, we conclude that, what words you put next to the icon really do make a big difference. And that if the advertising industry actually wanted people to understand this, they could probably iterate further on this and come up with something that was more meaningful. All right. So the last study that I want to talk about is this work we did for the state of California. California passed their California Consumer Privacy Act about 2 years ago. And among other things, it says that companies have to have a link on their website to do not sell my personal information. And optionally, they can have a button or logo next to that link. And so we wondered, well, what is that button or logo going to look like? And we actually contacted the California Attorney General's office, and they said they didn't know. And so we decided to help them and suggest what it might look like. So we went through a very rapid process of developing and evaluating an icon. It was very rapid because they had a 90-day public comment period that we had to respond to. And there's a paper on that you can read if you want all the details, which I won't have time to talk about here. So we started out by just brainstorming different ideas and concepts for icons, and we put it on the whiteboard on Post-it notes. Then we turned these over to some designers, and they came up with some more polished icons. So we had some of them that focused on choices and consent. Some of them focused on opting out, so taking something out of something. So the arrow is supposed to indicate. And then some of them were focused on do not sell personal information. So a lot of dollar signs here. And then we also used the DAA privacy rights icon because the advertising industry said that if you take their blue icon and make it green, it means do not sell my personal information. We were skeptical, but okay, that's what they say. We'll test it too. So we did an initial evaluation on Mechanical Turk, and we showed people an icon and we asked them what it meant and what would happen if they clicked on it. And then we showed them all the icons and asked them questions about it. Half the people, we showed them the icons with words and half did not see words. So the first thing we learned is that, once again, icons are difficult to interpret without words. We also found that this toggle sort of button actually conveyed the idea of choices pretty well. And the $ with a slash conveyed do not sell my personal information pretty well, except that it also conveyed very strongly something about payments, which is not really appropriate. And these opt-out icons just mostly confused people. Also, people didn't recognize the stop signs, perhaps because they weren't red. And the DAA green icon just mostly confused people too. All right, so then we had our designers refine a few of these icons, make them in color. We did another study, and here we found that the $ with the slash best conveyed do not sell my personal information, and that the toggle best conveyed choices about the use of personal information. So we then looked at what people understood and what their misconceptions were. And we found that the toggle was pretty good. Most people correctly understood that it had something to do with accepting and declining. They didn't necessarily understand it had anything to do with privacy because, hey, there's nothing in there to indicate privacy, but they at least understood it had to do with choices. The DAA icon, people thought it was like a video play button or it was an info button. So that wasn't all that helpful. And the $, a lot of people thought it had something to do with money and payments. Then we looked at what words should we put next to it. Should we use what the Attorney General's office was recommending, do not sell my personal information or do not sell my info, or should we try some other words? And I don't have time to go into detail about all the different words that we looked at, but you can see there were quite a few. And we ran some tests on those, and we found 3 promising alternatives: privacy choices, privacy options, and personal info choices. Okay, so then we did a combo test where we put 3 icons together with 5 taglines in combination. So we had 23 combinations total, including those that had no icon or no tagline, but we didn't have 24 because it wouldn't make sense to test nothing at all. And we embedded them in a shoe store website so that we had the context of going to a website to buy shoes. And with this testing, we saw some of the same misconceptions we saw before, but also some new misconceptions related to buying shoes in a shoe store. And then we also saw, yet again, that none of the icons were very good without a tagline. All right, so based on these studies, we had our 90-day window to make recommendations to the Attorney General. And so we recommended the blue toggle icon, which seemed to work the best, with the tagline privacy options. But since their regulation had do not sell my personal information, we said, well, that would also work with the toggle icon. So this is what we recommended. And within days, the Attorney General came back and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And you can see their icon looks sort of similar to ours. It's red. It looks sort of like a toggle, but it's problematic in a number of ways. And one of the things that's particularly bad about it is it looks too much like an actual toggle. Whereas ours was carefully designed to look reminiscent of a toggle, but not quite like a toggle. And so people on Twitter were like, this is terrible. People said, yeah, I'd be afraid to click on it because I can't tell what state it's in. And maybe I've already opted out and now I wouldn't be opted out. So we ran another study and we tested theirs and ours, and we tested both the blue and the red color. We also tested a version with a bigger X. We found the size of the X didn't matter. We found that the colors didn't really matter that much, but there was a big difference between their version and our version. What you can see here is you can't like run a test, then make some changes and assume that you're going to get the same results that you had before. Like, you really need to test it again. So we gave this report back to the Attorney General, and they decided to just not have an icon at all for now. And they said they'd come back to it in the future. And then they sent us over some other icons and said, hey, could you test these for us? These, of course, were actually pretty similar to icons we'd already tested, but we tested them again. There were some things they wanted us to do differently this time. And in particular, they wanted to know whether the icons stood out on the website and whether they motivated people to click. And they only cared about California residents. So we adjusted our protocol a bit. I don't have time to go into detail, but basically we added some things so that before we drew people's attention to the icon, we asked them questions about the web page, and then we're like, oh, and did you see any information about privacy? To see if they happen to have noticed that while they were looking at other things on the website. Okay. So what we found out was that when we put these icons on the page, people had more misconceptions than when there was no icon. So these icons were kind of messing things up. We did see that the icons were successfully drawing people's attention, but they were confusing people. So we gave that information back to the Attorney General's office. And then we waited and waited and waited. And several months later, they finally came out and they said, okay, we're going to adopt that blue toggle icon that you guys recommended to us a year ago. And so that is now the official California privacy options icon. And now we're just waiting for people to start using it. All right, so let me wrap up here. We had a number of takeaways from all of these different studies. So hopefully you are completely convinced that there's a lot of usability problems with privacy interfaces, and that the proliferation of IoT devices is really exacerbating the problem. That it's useful to have standardized disclosure and choice mechanisms, and it is useful to have machine readable policies and automated tools, and that it's really important to actually do the evaluation with users to find out if they are useful and usable.